Wait,
Jeff
now?
Now.
You want me to audition now?
Time, Jeff, time. We don't have time. We have to audition now.
Okay, now I'm intimidated.
Hey, it's Tim Carmichael, and like Jeff Bezos says,
do something you're very passionate about.
So let's help you do something you're passionate about with Jeff Bezos and my take on his top 10 rules for success.
And touchdown.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 would believe nation.
Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Project yourself forward.
Do something you're very passionate about. And don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day. I think we actually saw this. I think you see it all over the place in many different contexts, but I think we saw it in the internet world quite a bit, where at the sort of peak of the sort of internet mania in, say, 1999, you found people who were very passionate about something. They kind of left that job and decided, I'm going to do something in the internet, because it's it was almost like the the 1849 gold rush in a way. I mean, you find that people, if you go back and study the history of the 1849 gold rush, you find that at that time everybody who was within shouting distance of California was, they might have been a doctor, but they quit being a doctor and they started panning for gold. And that almost never works. And even if it does work, according to some metric, financial success or whatever it might be, I suspect it leaves you ultimately unsatisfied. So you really need to be very clear with yourself. And I think one of the best ways to do that is this notion of projecting yourself forward to age 80, looking back on your life and trying to make sure you've minimized the number of regrets you have. That works for career decisions. It works for family decisions. Do you want? I have a 14-month-old son, and it's very easy for me to, if I think about myself when I'm 80, I know I want to watch that little guy grow up. And so I don't want to be 80 and think, shoot, I missed that whole thing and I don't have the kind of relationship with my son that I wished I had, and so on and so on.
Rule number 2, have the beginner's mind.
One of the great paradoxes of inventing at a high level is that you need to be an expert in your domain area and you need to have a beginner's mind. You absolutely need both of those things. The world is too complex to actually just be a beginner. So, I can't, no matter how inventive I am, I can't go invent a new kind of brain surgery. You have to be a neurosurgeon. You have to already know all there is to know about brain surgery and then take it to the next level. The problem is, for many people, by the time they become true experts, they've lost that ability to see things in a fresh way. They've lost the beginner's mind. And so that's another thing. You always need to be stepping back and saying, if I'm an expert in launch vehicles or whatever it is, I need to step back and say, okay, if I were looking at this for the first time, what would I be seeing and noticing? These are just some of the things you need to do to be innovative.
Rule number 3, think long term.
I am building, along with a team of people, including the father of the 10,000-year clock, a guy named Danny Hillis, in a mountain in West Texas, a very large clock designed to last 10,000 years. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Moments ago, he seemed sane. But the clock is a symbol for long-term thinking. And if we can build a clock, and we think we can, there's a lot of engineering that goes into this clock. It's exceedingly complicated, and we don't have enough time to talk about the cam that tracks the motion of the Earth's orbit as it deviates over the course of 10,000 years, and so on and so on. There's a lot of interesting stuff if you want to keep time for 10,000 years. But the symbol is important for a couple of reasons. One, if we think long term, and here I'm thinking, when I say we, I mean we humans. If we think long term, we can accomplish things that we couldn't otherwise accomplish. So if I came up to you, Werner, and I said, look, I want you to solve world hunger in 5 years. You would rightly decline the challenge. But if I said, Werner, I want you to solve world hunger in 100 years, now that's more interesting. Because then you start to first create the conditions under which such change could occur. And all we've done there is change the time horizon. We didn't change the challenge, we changed the time horizon. So time horizons matter. They matter a lot. And the other thing I would point out is that we humans are getting awfully sophisticated in technological ways and have a lot of potential to be very dangerous to ourselves. And it seems to me we are, as a species, going to have to start thinking longer term. And so this is a symbol. I think symbols can be very powerful. The clock has 5 anniversary chambers. These are big. This is all carved out inside of a mountain. And in the remote, it's kind of like you have to take a pilgrimage to get there. And when it's finally done, we'll, let people come and tour the clock. But it has 5 anniversary chambers. The first one is a room that kind of like the cuckoo on a clock, and it shows this animation once a year. The second chamber does this animation once every 10 years. The third chamber once every 100 years. The fourth chamber once every 1,000 years. And the 5th anniversary chamber just once at the end of the 10,000 years. And we're only planning to build the animations for the first and second chambers. We figure our future generations can worry about the 3rd, 4th, and 5th chambers.
Rule number 4, minimize stress.
I laugh a lot. So it is, there are, I think stress, you can be, I think one of the things that's very important to note about stress is that stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over. So if I find that some particular thing is causing me to have stress, that's a warning flag for me. What it means is there's something that I haven't completely identified, perhaps in my conscious mind, that is bothering me, and I haven't yet taken any action on it. I find as soon as I identify it and make the first phone call or send off the first email message or whatever it is that we're going to do to start to address that situation, even if it's not solved, the mere fact that we're addressing it dramatically reduces any stress that might come from it. So stress comes from ignoring things that you shouldn't be ignoring, I think in large part. So stress doesn't come, people get stress wrong all the time, in my opinion. Stress doesn't come from hard work, for example. You can be working incredibly hard and loving it. And likewise, you can be out of work and incredibly stressed over that. So, and likewise, if you kind of use that as an analogy for what I was just talking about, if you're out of work, but you're going through, a disciplined approach of, a series of job interviews and so on and working to remedy that situation, you're going to be a lot less stressed than if you're just worrying about it and doing nothing.
Also, to make sure you're actually taking action after watching this video, I've designed a special free worksheet just for this video. The worksheet will highlight all of the lessons learned in this video, as well as pull out our 3 favorite learnings and quotes that will inspire you to actually do something. The worksheet will also give you space to write down what your key takeaways are and your specific plan of action to make sure you're getting results. If you want the worksheet designed specifically for this video, absolutely for free, there's a link in the description below. Go click on it and start building the momentum in your life and your business. I'll see you there. Rule number 5, focus on customer experience.
We got this company just about ready to launch, and we were looking at it, looking at this little tiny fulfillment center. We were here by then in this building. We had a basement fulfillment center. To call it a fulfillment center was very grand. There's a lot of puffery. It was 400 square feet, which is about the size of a 1-car garage. And we launched this business, and we're looking at it, and we didn't know if anybody would order from us. We really didn't. And in fact, one of the software engineers looked at this little space, and he said, I can't figure out whether this is incredibly optimistic or hopelessly pathetic. And indeed, we didn't know. We had no idea whether anybody would want to buy things in this way. The business plan called for generating sales very slowly as customers changed their attitudes. The original business plan, which I thought was very optimistic at the time, called for Amazon.com to generate $70 million in sales in the year 2001. We actually generated in excess of $3 billion in sales in the year 2001. And we knew, by the way, that we were really on to something in those first 30 days. In the first 30 days, we got orders from all 50 states and 45 different countries with not a dollar of advertising, just all word of mouth. In the first year, we didn't spend anything on advertising. All of it was word of mouth. And that really forged the company that we were going to focus on customer experience because we saw the power of word of mouth so very, very clearly in those early days. There's something great about word of mouth online, by the way, and feedback from customers, which is that email turns off the politeness gene in the human being. It's wonderful. So people actually tell you what they really think, usually in all caps. So we get lots of info and feedback from our customers, and we try to use it well.
Rule number 6, solve a problem.
Blue Origin is a company that's developing a vertical takeoff, vertical landing space vehicle. So it takes off on its tail like a normal rocket and then comes back and lands on its tail like a Buck Rogers rocket. It's designed to be reusable. We've built our first development vehicle. We built our second development vehicle. We're right now working on our third development vehicle. Great team of engineers located in Seattle. Another team of people test and operations in West Texas where we do our flights. And it's proceeding along very nicely. I'm hopeful that this third development vehicle will be our last, but we can't know for sure. And then we will build our operational vehicle and start taking people to suborbital mission. We'll sell tickets. The long-term goal of Blue Origin is to not only do suborbital, but also orbital, and to democratize space travel so that anybody who wants to go into space can afford to do so. You need reusability. So when you go look at any approach that doesn't have reusability is never going to be low cost. There are only two problems with space travel today. It's too expensive and it's too dangerous. Other than that, it's fine. So we hope to solve those two problems. And if you want to solve those problems and have a spacefaring species, you need to practice. And you can't practice with expendable vehicles. It's like, it's flying you get on a 747 with a bunch of other passengers, fly to Hawaii, and then throw the whole plane away. It's just a bad cost structure. And so we need reusability. So you have to get the vehicle back. And one of the ways to get it back is to put wings on it, and then you can land it on a runway. Another way to get the vehicle back is to land it vertically under rocket power. And both techniques have advantages and disadvantages. One of the things I like about vertical landing is if you get it to work, it's very scalable. It scales to very, very large size, whereas wings sort of, they top out a bit.
Rule number 7, provide low costs.
Directionally, our goal, and this has been true it's kind of a cultural trait at Amazon, our focus is going to be the low-cost provider of these kinds of high-quality services. So as we are able to get smarter, as we're able to figure out how to do things more efficiently, we are going to be returning those cost efficiencies to customers in the form of lower prices on things like EC2. There are other things that that it may be that we need some instance sizes that are smaller than what we have today. So the smallest instance we have today is 10 cents per compute hour, and we're also looking always at returning some of the cost savings we get on things like bandwidth charges, disk space charges, and so on and so on. The good news is that those things do get cheaper over time, and as we get more efficient and organized, we'll be able to return, I think, quite a bit of savings to customers.
Rule number 8, follow your passion.
The advice that I would give entrepreneurs is and I do this, I meet sometimes with young aspiring entrepreneurs and college grads, and I have, the main thing is don't chase the hot new thing, whatever it is. It's so hard to catch something that everybody already knows is hot. Instead, position yourself and wait for the wave to come to you. And the way so then you would say, well, where? Position myself where? And I think what you do, position yourself in something that captures your curiosity, something that, that you're missionary about. Well, I tell people, when we acquire companies, I'm always trying to figure out, is this person who leads this company a missionary or a mercenary? And I don't like mercenaries, and I don't like mercenary cultures. And the missionary is building the product, building the service, because they love the customer, because they love the product, because they love the service. The mercenary is building the product or the service so that they can flip the company and make money. And one of the great paradoxes is that the missionaries usually end up making more money than the mercenaries anyway.
Rule number 9, find the path that works for you.
A lot of people, and I'm just not one of them, believe that you should live for the now. I think what you do is you think about the great expanse of time ahead of you and try to make sure that you're planning for that in a way that's going to leave you ultimately satisfied. So this is just this is the way it works for me. And I mean, everybody needs to find that for themselves. So I think there are a lot of paths to satisfaction, and you need to find one that works for you.
And rule number 10, the last one before some very special bonus clips, is have fun.
I pretend I'm not superstitious. I pretend to be very scientific, but I actually am superstitious a little bit. I have a pair of lucky boots. And I wear them every time. Blue Origin, it's their Texas cowboy boots. And I wear them, they're giant. They come up to here and they have red stars on them. They're very flashy. And I wear them every time we launch our space vehicle. And we only had one failure at the very beginning of the program, and that's the only time I did not wear the lucky boots. So I present to you the evidence.
How do you handle these mavericks? How do you protect them from the institutions destroying them?
Well, I think that has to be culture. You have to teach the value that these people bring, but also I would push hard on the mavericks to say you also have to be organized. You can't just be a crazy person. So it's fine to be a maverick, but write your ideas down, sell your ideas, persuade, create the conditions where the ideas can blossom. You can't get anything done if you're not, if you're just purely a creative person with zero organizational skills, you're probably not going to get much done. Be stubborn on vision and flexible on details. You really can't accomplish anything important if you're not stubborn on vision, because things that are important take a long time. They take teams. You can't do it by yourself, and so you really need to have a crisp idea of the vision. You need to stay incredibly relentless on that vision, but you need to be flexible on the details, because you've got to be experimental to accomplish anything important, and that means you're going to be wrong a lot, and so you're going to try something on your way to that vision, and that's going to be the wrong thing, the wrong decision. You're going to have to back up, take a little course correction, and try again. And so you cannot be stubborn on the details. You have to be flexible on the details. A young person starting their career, I think there are probably a lot of things. Some of them are very well known and people have heard them many times. They're still true. One of those that you should always focus on, a young person should find something that they're passionate about to do. And that's not going to surprise anyone. It's a clear thing to do. It's very hard. If you don't love your work, you're never going to be great at it. I think the other thing I would suggest to any young person, even before they start their career, is to really think about their choices. Because I find young people, and when I was young, I made this mistake too. You can get very fixed on your gifts. So everybody has gifts. You have gifts and you have things that you didn't get gifted. Maybe you're
extremely beautiful, maybe you're extremely good at mathematics, there are a lot of things that you can be given. But those things can confuse you because they're not the things that construct your life. It's your choices that construct your life, not your gifts. You can celebrate your gifts, be proud of them, be happy of them. Actually, don't be proud of them, be celebratory of them, but you can't be proud because they're gifts. They were given to you. You didn't earn them. You can only be proud of the things you earn. And so, as I got older, I started to realize I wasn't proud of my gifts. I was always good at school. School was always easy for me, and I was always proud that I was a great student. I got A's in all my classes. I was good at math, all of that. And I thought that's who I was, but it's not true. Those are the things that are gifts. What was hard for me is deciding to work hard, deciding to use my gifts in certain ways, to challenge myself, to do things that I didn't think I could do, to put myself in uncomfortable situations. We all I would say to a young person, you can choose a life of ease and comfort, or you can choose a life of service and adventure. Which one of those, when you're 90 years old, are you going to be more proud of? We would all love all of our numbers to be smooth lines up and to the right, and that would be terrific. But that's not how it works. Those numbers are output measures, and I guess you could try to manage your quarterly earnings very precisely, but I think personally that would be a mistake. Most of the work that we put into any particular quarter happened years ago. So it's not, there aren't that many knobs you can turn during a quarter. I mean, you can, but they're like eating your seed corn if you turn those knobs. You don't want to do that. And so people, I think if you focus on the controllable inputs to your business instead of the outputs, in the long term, you get better results. So the Benjamin Graham quote here is that in the short term, the stock market is a voting machine. In the long term, it's a weighing machine. And I think people are well advised to build a company that wants to be weighed and not voted upon. And that means having good return on invested capital and having lots of free cash flow. But if I said, here's a job I would reject. If somebody came up to me and said, Jeff, I want your job to be to drive up the Amazon stock price and just manage that directly. Now, this might sound ridiculous to some of you, but many companies actually do this. They actually go out and they try to sell the stock. That's kind of the final output. And it's much better to say, okay, let's not do that. That's not going to be sustainable. It's kind of a silly approach. What are the inputs to a higher stock price? And you say, okay, well, free cash flow and return on invested capital are inputs to a higher stock price. Okay, so let's keep working backwards. What are the inputs to free cash flow? And you keep working backwards until you get to something that's controllable. And a controllable input for free cash flow would be something like lower cost structure. And then you back up from there and you say, okay, well, if we can improve our picking efficiency in our fulfillment centers and reduce defects are very, very costly. It's probably, reducing defects at the root is one of the best ways to lower cost structure. And so then that starts to be a job you would accept. You would say, if you're a reasonable person, you would say, I have no idea how to drive up the stock price. I can't manage that directly. It's not a controllable input. But I can make your picking algorithms more efficient. And that will reduce cost structure and then, follow that chain all along the way.
Failure and invention are inseparable twins. Everybody wants to be inventive. If you go talk to corporate America or any institution, actually, government agencies and so on, innovation is something to be proud of. People like invention. But the problem is they don't like failure. And you cannot have invention without failure. If you already know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. And only through experimentation can you get real invention. The most important inventions come from trial and error with lots of failure. And the failure is critical, and it's also embarrassing. And so that's why people, when we're kids, we always are doing trial and error, and we're never embarrassed. You know, you watch a little toddler, and they will try for hours to put a square peg in a round hole, and it never works, but it doesn't keep them from trying. And they try things like that, and that's how they learn. And we all have that when we're little, and then as we get older, somehow it's not as cool as you get older to fail and to fall down. It looks clumsy, and so we get in our grooves, we have a set of expertise and skills, it's kind of a comfort zone, and you have to constantly push yourself to say, no, I don't care about failure. In fact, I say at Amazon, we have to grow the size of our failures as the size of our company grows. We have to make bigger and bigger failures, because otherwise none of our failures will be needle movers. And so I would see it as a very bad sign over the long run if Amazon wasn't making larger and larger failures. And if you do that all along the way, that is going to protect you from ever having to make that big, kind of Hail Mary bet that you sometimes see companies make right before they fail and go out of existence.
The most influential people in my life were my grandparents. And my mother had me when she was 17 years old. She raised me with my grandparents' help. And she was still in high school when she had me. That was not cool in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1964. But she did an incredible job. But I was lucky because I had not just her, but she married my father when I was about 4 years old. He has been a huge influence in my life. But my grandmother and grandfather were like second set of parents for me. And you learn different things from them because they're at a different stage of life and they know different things. They're calm about certain things. It was a huge gift to me. My grandfather had a ranch in Texas, and I spent all my summers there from like age 4 to 16, and he was the most self-reliant person. He did all of his own veterinary work, all the things, and to observe him solve problems and figure out how to do things with no tools and no resources and very small amounts of money, it was a huge education from an early age. So we were very lucky. One of the things that I know people who they don't have great family situations, and sometimes they break that cycle, and they are the ones who pull out of it. Those people are the ones I reserve my highest admiration for. As the owner of the Post, I know that at times the Post is going to write stories that are going to make very powerful people very unhappy. And
are you upset if they are writing critical stories about Amazon, which they do?
No, I'm not upset at all. When I first bought the Post in 2013, never. And I would be humiliated to interfere. I would be so embarrassed. I would turn bright red, and it has nothing to do with, I don't even get so far, I just don't want to. For me, it would feel icky. It would feel gross. It would be one of those things when I'm 80 years old, I would be so unhappy with myself if I interfered. Why would I? Yeah. I want that paper to be independent.
Amazon, one of the things we try to do is have multiple paths to yes. And so here's a little thought experiment for you. If you are a junior executive at Amazon, and if Amazon did this in the typical kind of corporate hierarchy way, you had an idea. You need to get your boss to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea, and then your boss's boss's boss needs to greenlight that idea. There are probably 5 levels or more before that idea gets the go-ahead. Assume instead that you're an entrepreneur with a startup company idea and you need venture capital. You go to Sand Hill Road and you go to the first venture capitalist and they tell you no. And you go to the second one and they tell you no. Maybe your 20th one tells you yes. You got 19 no's and 1 yes, and you're still good to go. So that venture capital model there's multiple paths to yes. There were 20 people who could give you a yes, and it didn't matter how many gave you a no. So if you want innovative thinking, you have to think about how can we you want a large number of high judgment people empowered to greenlight things. You want multiple paths to yes. And you want a system where, as a junior Air Force officer with a good idea, The first 5 people tell me no, and somehow I can still go pursue that idea. So you got to figure out, that's an organizational challenge that big organizations have to figure out a way to do. And by the way, I get, this happens all the time. I'll say, I don't think that's a good idea, but somebody else will green light it. And I'm fine with that, because usually the cost of the experiments is pretty small. Things only get expensive when they work, right? Once something works, you're like, whoa, we need to double down on that.
2 pizza teams is something that we've been preaching at Amazon almost from the very beginning, and it's a simple idea, which is no team should be so large that it cannot be fed with just 2 pizzas. And so obviously to do great things you need big teams, but you need to subdivide them. And the reason that it's so helpful is because there's a natural, we humans grew up around campfires and telling each other stories, and you're sitting at tables tonight that have about 10 people at each table. 10 people, maybe 12 people, is the perfect size to have a natural human coordination without a lot of structure. And if you want to have a big group of 100 people or 500 people organized, you have to have a lot of structure to make that work. And so if you can arrange to do big things with a multitude of small teams, and that takes a lot of effort to organize that way, but if you can figure that out, the communication on those small teams will be very natural and easy.
Warren Buffett has this great quote. He says, you can hold a rock concert, and that's okay, and you can hold a ballet, and that's okay. Just don't hold a rock concert and advertise it as a ballet. Investors come in all shapes and sizes. They have different investment horizons, different approaches, different beliefs about what the right kind of portfolio looks like. And so it's not one, people use Wall Street as a shorthand, but there isn't one type of investor. They come in all shapes and sizes. And you have to be super clear about what kind of company you're trying to build, what your approach is. We laid that out in our 1997 annual shareholder letter. We said we were going to take big bets. We said they were going to fail. We said some of them hopefully were going to work. We said we were going to invest for the long term, that we were going to try to take advantage of market opportunities as they arose. And there's a certain kind of investor who is aligned with that approach. And so, again, you can hold the ballet or the rock concert, and both can work. Just be clear about which one you are, and then people can self-select. We don't meet with our biggest investors. We meet with investors who have low portfolio turns. So, investors that have, many investment funds have very high portfolio turns. They turn their portfolio multiple times per year. They're not really investors, they're traders. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different thing. But where are you going to spend your time and your energy is one of the most important decisions you get to make in life. We all have a limited amount of time, and where you spend it and how you spend it is just an incredibly levered way to think about the world. And so if you're going to spend time, explaining the stock or the company, really, we don't really explain the stock, we explain the company to people. You should do it to people who are long-term investors rather than traders. That's our point of view. When I'm 80, now 90, I want to have minimized the number of regrets that I have in my life. And most of our regrets are acts of omission. They're things we didn't try. It's the path untraveled. Those are the things that haunt us.
What do you say to employees when you obviously have some traders in the stock who are not happy and suddenly the stock is down 25% after a quarter?
Well, since 1997, at almost every all-hands meeting, we have 2 all-hands meetings a year. At almost every all-hands meeting, I remind employees that, if the stock is up 10% this month, don't feel 10% smarter, because when the stock is down 10% some month, you're going to have to feel 10% dumber, and it's not going to feel as good. And so it's, ownership is, we give most of our compensation is done in terms of stock compensation, and part and parcel with ownership is a mentality of long-term thinking. Owners think longer term than renters do. So I have a friend who rented his house to some tenants, and instead of getting a Christmas tree stand at Christmas, they just nailed the Christmas tree into the hardwood floors of the house. No owner would ever do that. And but sometimes that's a bad tenant. There are good tenants, but that's a bad tenant, and it's because this is the same old thing about nobody ever washed a rental car, and you take better care of the things that you own, but one of the responsibilities of ownership, and definitely deep inside the Amazon culture, is to think about the fundamentals of the business and not the daily fluctuations in the stock price. There's no information in it.
You shop on Amazon, and if you have something, the service you don't like, so do you just pick up the phone, call your team of 700,000 people, and tell them, I don't like this, change this, or
you know what I do? So I don't do this, it doesn't happen that often, but if I get a delivery that I don't like, maybe I don't like the way it's packaged or something, we have regular meetings of the senior executive team, and I bring the box to the meeting. And when I walk in, I haven't done this in a while, it's been a while, but when I bring in a box, everybody in the room is like, oh no, he's bringing in a box, because it's always some problem. But really the way I get feedback is primarily from my email address is very well known, and I keep it well known. And I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day from customers, and they always have something interesting to say when something goes wrong, because we have hundreds of millions of customers around the world, and no matter how good we are, we can still be better. You can always be better. Customers have a divine discontent, and they teach you if you listen to customers. So we watch for that, and we see patterns, and we can find places where it's not working, something's going wrong, and that's really how I get the feedback, is from customer input. And often, in all caps, angry, you ruined my child's birthday because the gift didn't show up on time. And we take that, and what you really want to do is you take that, it's an anecdote, it's a single example, but you need to find the root cause. What went wrong deep inside the system? How did this happen? Because then you can fix it for everyone, so that particular problem will never happen again. You don't just fix the symptom, you have to fix the root cause. And that's been the secret to our operational success for 20 years. What I want to achieve with Blue Origin is to build the heavy lifting infrastructure that allows for the kind of dynamic entrepreneurial explosion of thousands of companies in space that I have witnessed over the last 21 years on the internet. So when I think about the founding of Amazon.com, it only could work, so it take you back to 1995, July 1995, we open our doors. And this is a 10-person company. I'm driving the packages to the post office myself. And we were sitting on a bunch of heavy lifting infrastructure. Otherwise, a tiny company could never have started Amazon.com. You couldn't do it. For example, there was already a gigantic logistics network called the US Postal Service and UPS and FedEx. That would have been tens of billions, actually hundreds of billions of dollars of capital that you would have had to have laid out if you had to build a logistics network. We didn't have to do that. It existed. That heavy lifting was already done. The internet itself was sitting on top of, at that time, the long distance phone network. Again, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of capital put in place for long distance phone calls, but repurposed for the internet. Payment system. There was already a payment system. We didn't have to do that. It was called the credit card, and it had been initially put in place for travelers, and so on and so on. And you can go through, and what we were able to do is take all of that heavy lifting infrastructure and kind of reassemble it in a new way and do something new and inventive with it. And that's one lens through which you can view the founding of Amazon.com. In space today, that is impossible. On the internet today, two kids in their dorm room can reinvent an industry. That's how it could, because the heavy lifting infrastructure is in place for that. Today, two kids in their dorm room can't do anything interesting in space. You could build a CubeSat. There's not that much interesting about CubeSats. And that may change, but right now, there's just, there are certain laws of physics and certain things you need size for, and things need to be big. We need to be able to put big things in space at low cost. And so if I'm 80 years old and I can say to myself that Blue Origin did the heavy lifting, I'm using my Amazon winnings to do a new piece of heavy lifting infrastructure, which is low cost access to space. Vehicles have to be reusable. You can't throw them away. Throw away space vehicles every time, you're never going to lower the cost. So we're trying to lower the price of admission into space so that thousands of entrepreneurs can then do amazing, surprising things. Nobody in 1995,
so it's not that much. Just
nobody in 95 predicted
travel.
Snapchat.
Right.
You know, I can't predict for you what amazing entrepreneurs, brilliant, amazing entrepreneurs will do in space. But I know if I give them low-cost access to space, some brilliant, 22-year-old is going to figure it out.
It's one of those things about what companies get sustainable. It's those that provide platforms upon which others can build. Amazon does it,
empower
Apple does
others,
it,
empower others to do things. So AWS is like that. Kindle Direct Publishing is like that. Our third-party selling business is like that. Fulfillment by Amazon is like that. Every time you figure out some way of providing tools and services that empower other people to deploy their creativity, you're really onto something. I can do some things that Amazon would be hard for other people to do only because of my history with the company. And as the company has grown, of course, my job has changed very much. And it has, my main job today is I'm kind of I work hard at helping to maintain the culture. A culture of high standards, of operational excellence, of inventiveness, of willingness to fail, willingness to make bold experiments. I'm the counterbalance to the institutional no who can say yes. But I won't. I'm not going to be here forever. Amazon is a really many of the traits that make Amazon unusual are now deeply ingrained in the culture. In fact, if I wanted to change them, I couldn't. If I decided tomorrow that I wish Amazon did less pioneering and more close following, I couldn't do it. The culture cultures are self-reinforcing, and that's a good thing. The people who come to the company, sometimes people come to the company and they find Amazon very boring because we don't have enough, competitive zeal. We don't wake up. Some annual planning processes and some companies literally start with who are our 3 biggest enemies, and then here's how we're going to hold them at bay or defeat them. And we don't have such a list at Amazon. It's not how our annual planning process works. And so, but if you're on the other hand, if you're the kind of person who gets up in the morning and says in the shower time, what can we invent for customers and what can we do differently and how can we improve that experience and so on, then it's going to be a playground. I still run into work, by the way. I took my family on vacation to France, my wife's extended family. There were about 20 of us. And we had an unbelievably good time, great food, everything. We were there for a week. I got back to Seattle and I ran into the office. I'm having so much fun.
As number one on the list, we were talking to Steve Case yesterday, and he had been number one. And a couple of years later, he was not on the list.
Well, you're making me really nervous.
No, don't be nervous. Just tell me what could happen that would do that to you and Amazon, and how do you prevent that? Do you worry it could all come unraveled?
Well, I kind of have this experience kind of already happened to me because you put me on the cover of Time Magazine as Person of the Year in 1999, and about a year later, the internet bubble burst. I think Amazon stock went from $113 a share to $6 or something like that. So these things happen. The thing for companies is you need to be nimble and robust. So you need to be able to take a punch, and you also need to be quick and innovative and doing new things at a high speed. That's the best defense against the future. And you have to always be leaning into the future. If you're leaning away from the future is going to win every time.
To be innovative, you have to experiment. If you want to have more invention, you need to do more experiments per week, per month, per year, per decade. It's that simple. You cannot invent without experimenting. And here's the other thing about experiments, lots of them fail. If you know it's going to work in advance, it is not an experiment. And what happens in big organizations, Amazon's a big organization now too, the Air Force is a big organization, is that we start to confuse experimentation with operational excellence. So operational excellence is one of our 4 key principles at Amazon. We're building a fulfillment center. We've built over 150 large fulfillment centers around the world now. We know how to do that. That is not an experiment. If we build the 151st fulfillment center and screw it up, that's just a failure. That's not the kind of failure we're seeking. We want failures where we're trying to do something new, untested, never proven. That's a real experiment, and they come in all scale sizes.
There's your completely massive and globally dominant commerce business, first party and third party. There is AWS, Amazon Web Services, which came out of nowhere and is now massive. You're in the hardware business, including Echo and Kindle and the phone, grocery delivery, payments, TV shows. You're now making TV shows, advertising. Jeff, how can you possibly do all of that?
Henry, you're exhausting me.
How can you possibly do all of that and do it okay? Even okay, let alone good.
So I think one way to think about this is, what are you really focusing on? So, I'm focusing on those things that I think make Amazon unusual. Genuine customer obsession. So like every single thing you just mentioned, when our senior executives sit down and review those programs, they're looking for customer obsession. Why did we expand into things like electronics, tools, and kitchen, since those businesses are not today profitable? And the answer is that that it increases our addressable market size, so we can ultimately build a much larger company by entering into those new product categories. And second, while it's true that those new categories, which are only 3 years old, and by the way, electronics, tools, and kitchen is now a $600 million business at Amazon.com, which makes it one of the largest, on a standalone basis, it's probably in the top 4 or 5 e-commerce companies anywhere in the world. So that business is growing and growing very rapidly. And it has one of the big advantages, it has a huge audience of early adopters, which is why companies like Segway choose us as the exclusive launch platform for products like that, because really early adopters are the kind of people who buy stuff like this. But that business ultimately will be, electronics in particular, in my opinion, will be our largest, most profitable business one day. When you start a new business, there are certain fixed costs that come along with starting that business. And then the business has to reach enough scale so that the profit from the business, the variable profit, can cover those fixed costs. The best advice I can give somebody is do something that you think is interesting and let the waves catch you. Something that I see people do, which I don't think is a good idea, is they try to chase the current thing. I saw this so much in 1997 and 1998, 1999 with respect to the internet. There were, in 94 and 95 and 96 and 97, mostly the people who were, the earlier you get, the more true this is, but the people who were sort of looking at this space and starting companies were genuinely interested in it. They thought it was really cool. By the time you got to 1999, like doctors were stopping, like, screw that doctor thing, I'm going to start a .com company. And so that really made no sense whatsoever. People were sort of abandoning the things they were genuinely interested in, trying to catch a wave. And whenever you try to catch a wave, you're almost always too late. So it's better to just, if you're paddling after it, you basically have to wait in place and let it come to you. One of the unusual things that we do in the Kindle device business is we sell our hardware near break even. And so we make money when people use the device, not when they buy the device. And that is very aligning with customers. If I buy a device and I put it in my desk drawer and never use it, then Amazon doesn't deserve to make any money. Likewise, it causes us to have the right kinds of behaviors. So for example, if we're not making money when people buy the device, then we don't need people to be on the upgrade treadmill. We have people who are still using 5-year-old Kindle Ones, and we're perfectly happy about that. AWS is very similar because it's a pay-as-you-go service. We are not incented to get people to overbuy hardware, to operate at low utilization rates. Our point of view on this is if we can arrange things in such a way that our interests are aligned with our customers, then in the long term, that will work out really well for customers, and it'll work out really well for Amazon. My view is I don't even like the phrase work-life balance. I think it's misleading. I like the phrase work-life harmony, because I know that if I am energized at work, happy at work, feeling like I'm adding value, part of a team, whatever energizes you, that makes me better at home. It makes me a better husband, a better father, and likewise, if I'm happy at home, it makes me a better employee, a better boss, all the things. It's not primarily about, there may be crunch periods where it's about the number of hours in the week, but that's not the real thing. Usually it's about, do you have energy? And is your work depriving you of energy, or is your work generating energy for you? And you know, there are people, everybody in this room knows people who fall into these two camps. You're in a meeting and the person comes in the room. Some people come into the meeting and they add energy to the meeting. Other people come into the meeting and the whole meeting just deflates. And those people just, they drain energy from the meeting. And you have to decide which of those kinds of people you're going to be. Are you going to add energy?
And the same thing at home.
And the same thing at home. And it's a wheel, it's a cycle, it's a flywheel, it's a circle, it's not a balance. Because a balance, that's why that metaphor is so dangerous, because it implies there's a strict trade-off. And you could be out of work, have all the time for your family in the world, but really depressed and demoralized about your work situation, and your family wouldn't want to be anywhere near you. They would wish you would take a vacation from them. And so it's not about the number of hours, not primarily. I suppose if you went crazy with 100 hours a week or something, yeah, that maybe there are limits, and they probably. But I've never had a problem, and I think it's because both sides of my life give me energy, and that's what I would recommend. And that's what I do recommend to interns and execs. Why not stick to the knitting? So, and my point of view on sticking to the knitting is that it's not the right thing for most businesses to be that focused. It's true that you hone skills in a business. You learn to be really good at a few things, and you do want to extend out from those skills. But your customer needs change slowly over time, and you have to learn new skills on behalf of your customers. So basically, we had a bunch of readers as customers, people who love to read. And they didn't know it, our customers, they weren't asking directly, but basically they were saying to us, you're going to have to learn a new skill. You're going to have to stretch and learn how to manufacture hardware so that you can continue to serve me 10 years from now. That's what our customers were telling us. And that's good. If businesses, try new things and stretch their muscles and put themselves in uncomfortable situations, I think one of the reasons that businesses stick to the knitting is because it's way more comfortable. A couple of other things that are essential for innovation and invention that are not as fun. One of them is you have to have a willingness to fail. You have to have a willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time. If you do something in a new way, and I don't care what it is, people are initially going to misunderstand it relative to the traditional way. And there'll be well-meaning critics who, genuinely want the best outcome, but they're worried about this new way. And there'll also be, of course, self-interested critics who have a vested interest in the traditional, they have some profit stream tied to the traditional way. But doing things, if you never want to be criticized, for goodness sake, don't do anything new. So it's okay though, if you have a willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time, if you have a willingness to fail, then what you can do is you can ramp up your rate of experimentation. So successful invention is inventions that customers care about. It's actually relatively easy to invent new things that customers don't care about. But successful invention, if you want to do a lot of that, you basically have to increase your rate of experimentation. And that you can think of as a process. How do you go about organizing your systems, your people, all of your assets, your own daily life and how you spend time? How do you organize those things to increase your rate of experimentation? Because not all of your experiments are going to work. You need people who, and this is very tricky, you need people who are experts in a certain domain area, because the world is so complex today, it's really hard to invent something if you're not an expert, if you don't have the underlying tools at your disposal and know what's going on. You can't invent something in neurosurgery without knowing something about neurosurgery. It's just going to be very difficult because we're very advanced. And that's true in every field of endeavor. But to really be an inventor, you have to combine that expertise with the beginner's mind. You have to have a certain childlike ability to not be trapped by your expertise. And that fresh look, that beginner's mind, once you're an expert, is unbelievably hard to maintain. But great inventors are always looking. They have a certain divine discontent, and they may have seen something 1,000 times, and still it occurs to them that that thing, even though they're accustomed to it, could be improved. And that's, you have to look for people like that. And I also think cultures support that. You can't, even if you're that kind of person, if you're in a culture that doesn't support failure, willingness to fail is critical for invention, willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Most inventions don't really work that well in the beginning. They're clumsy, they're little toddlers, they're always falling and tripping. And so you have to have a culture in your organization that supports this kind of stumbling and wandering. Just because you're wandering doesn't mean you're lost. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're trying to invent. I tell senior executives, you should have the least stress. There's this weird, I think, false idea that CEOs, I'm a CEO, there's this false idea that CEOs are under the most stress. Well, I look at that, I'm like, why? You're in charge. Why don't you delegate the stress? From the very beginning, in 1994, when I came across this fact that the web was growing at 2,300% a year, I was working on Wall Street, a very specialized kind of investment bank called a quantitative hedge fund, a company called D.E. Shaw. And when I decided I was going to go do this crazy thing, I went and told my boss, and he said, well, let's go for a walk. So we went on a 2-hour walk in Central Park. And he actually thought it was a good idea. He's a very smart guy. His name is David Shaw. He's one of the few people I know who has a fully developed left brain, a fully developed right brain, just a super smart guy. And he said, this is a great idea, but it would be a better idea for somebody who didn't already have a good job. That was actually a compelling argument to me. And so I went away. He convinced me to think about it for 2 more days. And it was very hard to make that decision. And until I found the right framework in which to make the decision. And I think because I know there are a lot of people who are interested in entrepreneurial activities out there, I think this could be useful. It's the right framework for me anyway to make the kind of decision was a regret minimization framework. So I projected myself into the future, and I'm 80 years old, and I'm looking back on my life. What do I want to have done at that point? I want to have minimized all the regrets that I have. And I knew that when I was 80, there was no chance that I would regret having walked away from my 1994 Wall Street bonus or any of that kind of thing. I wouldn't even remember that. But I did think there was a chance that I might regret not having participated somehow in this thing that I thought was going to be very exciting called the internet. And I also knew that if I tried and failed, I wouldn't regret that. So once I thought about it that way, it became incredibly easy to make that decision. What's going to change in the next 10 years? And that is an interesting question. It's a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that that second question is actually the more important of the two. Because you can build a business strategy around the things that are stable in time. And so as you pointed out, in our retail business, we know that customers want low prices. And I know that's going to be true 10 years from now. They want fast delivery. They want vast selection. It's impossible to imagine a future 10 years from now where a customer comes up to me and says, Jeff, I love Amazon, I just wish the prices were a little higher. You know how I love Amazon, I just wish you delivered a little more slowly. Impossible. And so the effort that we put into those things, spinning those things up, we know the energy we put into it today will still be paying dividends for our customers 10 years from now. And so when you have something that you know is true, even over the long term, you can afford to put a lot of energy into it. On AWS, the big ideas are also pretty straightforward. It's impossible for me to imagine that 10 years from now, somebody is going to say, I love AWS, I just wish it were a little less reliable. Or I love AWS, I just wish you would raise prices. It should be a little more expensive. Or I love AWS, and I wish you would innovate and improve the APIs at a slightly slower rate. None of those things you can imagine. And so the big ideas in business are often very obvious, but it's very hard to maintain a firm grasp of the obvious at all times. But if you can do that, and continue to spin up those flywheels and put energy into those things, as we're doing with AWS, over time, you build a better and better service for your customers on the things that genuinely matter to them.
You know, as soon as you're doing something new, it's like being a toddler all over again. You get up, you fall down, you get up, you fall down, you get up, you fall down. And so businesses need to do that same thing. They need to remember that it's not that bad to fall down, and it doesn't hurt that much. When we try things like Amazon Web Services, we didn't know that was going to work. It has worked really well, but it's the kind of thing that if it hadn't worked, I always tell people, well, guess what? If something doesn't work, the day we stop doing it, all that will happen is our operating margins will improve. It won't be that bad. And companies get afraid. I think most companies get criticized for experiments that they tried that failed. But really, companies should be criticized for the omissions, the things they should have tried and didn't. And those almost always go unremarked.
That blank sheet of paper stage is one of the hardest stages. And one of the reasons it's hard is because at that stage, there's nobody counting on you but yourself. You know, one of the things that is very motivating, I mean, today it's easy because we've got, millions of customers counting on us and, thousands of investors counting on us and then thousands of employees all counting on each other. But in that beginning stage, it's really just you. And you can quit any time. Nobody's going to care. And so you set about doing the simple things first. So you want to start a company. Well, the first thing you do is you should write a business plan. And so I did that. I wrote about a 30-page business plan. I wrote a first draft. In fact, I wrote the first draft on the car trip from the East Coast to the West Coast. And that was that is very helpful. Now, the business plan won't survive its first encounters with reality. It will always be different. The reality will never be the plan. But the discipline of writing the plan forces you to think through some of the issues and to get sort of mentally comfortable in the space.
You cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure. To invent, you need to experiment. And if you know in advance that it's going to work, it is not an experiment. And so that's a very important thing. They are inseparable twins, failure and invention. And so you have to be willing to do that. And it's embarrassing to fail. It's always embarrassing to fail. But you have to say, no, that's not how this works. If I said to you, you have a 10% chance with a particular decision, a 10% chance of a 100x return, you should take that bet every time. But you're still going to be wrong 9 out of 10 times. And it's going to feel bad 9 out of 10 times. And with technology, the outcomes, the results can be very long-tailed. The payoff can be very asymmetric, which is why you should do so much experimentation. Everybody knows that if you swing for the fences, you hit more home runs, but you also strike out more.
But with the baseball, that analogy doesn't go far enough, because with baseball, no matter how well you connect with the ball, you can only get 4 runs. The success is capped at 4 runs. But in business, every once in a while, you step up to the plate and you hit the ball so hard, you get 1,000 runs. And so when you have that kind of asymmetric payoff, and one at bat can get you 1,000 runs, it encourages you to experiment more. It's the right business decision to experiment more. It's also better for your customers. Customers like the successful experiments. I didn't need to build a transportation network. It existed already. It was UPS and the Royal Mail and the US Postal Service and Deutsche Post and so on and so on. I didn't have to build a telecommunications backbone to connect with my customers. It was there. It was called the internet. And in fact, the internet was resting on top of the long-distance phone network at that time. You guys remember the dial-up modem? Some of you do. Some of you are too young to. Some of you should go to a museum and see a dial-up modem.
What was that sound?
Yeah. And so I recently showed a group of youngsters a payphone. I came across one, and I was like, my God, guys, come over here. This may be the last one. You have to see it. So, the point is that Amazon got to rest on top of, we didn't have to build a payment system. It already existed. It was called the credit card. Computers were already on every desk, thanks to Microsoft, IBM, and Apple. But what were they being used for? To play games, not to buy things on Amazon. And so all that heavy lifting was in place. One of the key things about lean, defect reduction, being efficient, not letting defects travel downstream in any process. If you're going to eliminate waste, or as the Japanese call it, muda, you have to have information. And the data center has historically been an information-free zone as far as application developers are concerned. You would write code, and you have no idea how it's consuming resources. You're too insulated because you're in a pool of resources, and you can't meter it. One of the biggest, still unappreciated benefits of AWS is that application developers get a real sense of which inner loop is driving all the cost. Yeah. And that's a big deal. So that's just starting to, that's one of the ways that this approach to infrastructure dramatically reduces costs. In our data center, in our fulfillment centers and in our customer service centers, we have, we're always seeking to keep defects from moving downstream. So this is a principle that was probably best applied in the first best applied by Toyota. And they had this idea of what they call the and-on cord, which basically any factory worker could pull the cord and stop the whole automobile manufacturing line. And for old school auto manufacturing companies, that was considered crazy, absolutely insane. In fact, the opposite principle was typically at work, which is you did everything possible to keep that line running. And here Toyota flipped that on its head, and they said, look, anytime there's a defect, no matter how small, we want you to pull the cord and stop the whole line. And stopping things, if you do that in a line that has a lot of defects, initially you get a lot of and-on cord pulls, and it's very expensive. But over time, if you use that approach, you eliminate the defects closer and closer to the source. And the people who are fans of lean manufacturing and these kinds of techniques take almost as an article of faith, although there's a lot of evidence to support this in very diverse industries, that the further a defect travels downstream, the more expensive it becomes to fix. And so you want to stop those things. You don't want them to repeat and happen over and over. Invention is not disruptive. Only customer adoption is disruptive. At Amazon, we've invented a lot of things
that customers did not care about at all. And believe me, they were not disruptive to anyone. So it's only when customers like the new way that anything becomes disruptive. And so really it's just saying that you want to, if somebody comes to you with a business plan that they claim is disruptive, you should ask them to explain it to you in simpler language. And the simpler language is, why are customers going to adopt this? Why are they going to like it? Why is it better than the traditional way?
Just find something that you're passionate about. I would definitely, on the career advice side, the most important thing about your first job out of school is to pick a place where you think where your learning per unit time is going to be very high. You can optimize for a bunch of variables, and it can get very confusing. Where is the location? What's the salary going to be? And all those things are worth considering. They're all important. But make sure you pull back after you've done your analysis and say, am I also picking the place that I believe my learning per unit time is going to be the fastest? And you learn much more from a best practices company than you do. You learn no matter where you go. So if you go work for somebody and you're like, God, these people are all crazy. This is insane. You'll learn a lot of negative lessons that you can use later, and you can not do those things. But that process of elimination method takes a long time. So it's better to try and find a place that has really high hiring standards. Some of the basics especially, a place that's trying to recruit only A's hire A's, and B's hire C's, and C's hire D's. So you've got to hire only A's. And you need to pick a company that's doing those kinds of fundamental practices well, because then you'll learn so much. It'll set you up to do other things. So I would say that's probably the best career advice I can give. When you look at the kinds of things that you want to be able to do with your voice, it changes. For those of you who have used an Echo, the fact that it's always on, that you never have to charge it, it's always sitting there ready in your kitchen or your bedroom or wherever you put it, the fact that you can talk to it in a natural way removes a lot of barriers, a lot of friction, a lot of little tiny pieces of friction to be able to do things, to ask what the weather is. It's easier than taking your phone out of your pocket. And what people have found over and over again is that by removing the tiniest amounts of friction from ordinary activities, really people appreciate that, and it improves customers' lives. Sometimes, we expand into new areas in two ways. One is kind of, from a customer need. We will work from a customer need to the skills that we need. And the other one is skills forward, from a skill set we have to a new set of customers. So Kindle is an example of a customer need, and so we don't have any hardware skills. We've been doing this for 10 years now. But if you go back in time 10 years, we had no hardware team. We had to hire somebody to lead our hardware group, and then build a hardware team and build some institutional competence at it, and so on. That's a customer need backwards approach. And then skills forward, a great example of that is Amazon Web Services. We had the skills to do AWS. We had probably more distributed computing expertise than anybody else in the world. Because of the transactions. Transaction systems are so complicated and hard to build, and we had a service-oriented architecture of great complexity, probably before anybody else. And so because we were doing that, we could kind of see the future a little bit, and decided to build AWS, which has turned into a huge business in its own right. And that is, if you were always, business is very situational. And so rules of thumb are good, but they have to be applied to the right situation. So sometimes the old maxim that you should stick to the knitting is correct, but sometimes the adage that you should stick to the knitting is wrong. And a senior leader's job is to figure out in which situation are you. There are a few things I think, if you want to be an innovative company, that you have to do. First of all, I think innovation is a point of view. You have to actually select people that are part of the company who want to innovate and explore. Being a pioneering company and an explorer company isn't for everybody. Some people wake up in the morning and they get their energy, the thing they think about in the shower is they start their annual planning process, or however you want to think about it, with who are the 3 companies that we're going to kill this year. That's the conqueror mentality. And it's a competitor-focused mentality instead of a customer-focused mentality. And there's nothing, that mentality can succeed, by the way. So I'm not claiming, you know, the pioneering explorer approach is the only effective one. But when you attract people who have the DNA of pioneers and the DNA of explorers, you build a company of like-minded people who want to invent. And that's what they think about when they get up in the morning. How are we going to work backwards from customers and build a great service or a great product? That's a key element to invention. And that part is fun, by the way. So if you're the right kind of person and you like to invent, and you like change, everything you see as you move about the world, you think how it could be improved. We are, can we be, let's take China and India very separately. So we are winning in India very, very well. We have an amazing leader there, a guy named Amit, who has been at Amazon for 15 years and here in the US, and he moved back to India 4 or 5 years ago to start Amazon India. And that team is doing well. They have passed Flipkart. They are the leader in India now. So that is similar to Japan, Germany, the UK, France. Those countries are very. In China, the leader is JD, and we are totally adapting our strategy in China. We cannot run our normal playbook in China. It has to be specialized and different. So we're doing that. We have always had, and it's been from the very, very beginning, you can go back and read our 1997 shareholder letter, and the core of the company is customer obsession as opposed to competitor obsession. And that works really well for us. I think that the advantage of being customer focused is that customers are always dissatisfied. They always want more. And so they pull you along. If you're trying to serve them, they pull you along. Whereas if you're competitor obsessed, if you're the leader, you can kind of look around and you see everybody running behind you. Maybe you slow down a little. And customers are always pulling you. So I think if you want to be pioneering, if you want to be inventive, if you want a culture that is experimental, then you want to be customer obsessed rather than competitor obsessed. Every time I hear a story about Amit's father, I get more and more intrigued and want to meet him. And he's one of these guys who, Amit has done all these incredibly impressive things in his life, and somehow I get the impression that Amit's father is completely unimpressed by all of these things. And so the more I learn about Amit's father, the more curious I get. And this has been going on for 2 decades. And tomorrow night, I get to have dinner with Amit's father.
I hope Amit, Dad is impressed by Jeff. Special guest here, Lauren, welcome to India. Thank you for being here. Priya, wonderful chatting with you backstage. And tell me, have you seen any perceptible change in India apart from the traffic when you came last?
Apart from the traffic.
Apart from traffic.
It's interesting. So I guess the first time I came to India was about 11 years ago. One of them is you have to have a willingness to fail. You have to have a willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time. If you do something in a new way, and I don't care what it is, people are initially going to misunderstand it relative to the traditional way. And there'll be well-meaning critics who genuinely want the best outcome, but they're worried about this new way. And there'll also be, of course, self-interested critics who have a vested interest in the traditional, they have some profit stream tied to the traditional way. But doing things, and if you never want to be criticized, for goodness sake, don't do anything new. So it's okay though, if you have a willingness to be misunderstood for long periods of time, if you have a willingness to fail, then what you can do is you can ramp up your rate of experimentation. So successful invention is inventions that customers care about. It's actually relatively easy to invent new things that customers don't care about. But successful invention, if you want to do a lot of that, you basically have to increase your rate of experimentation. And that you can think of as a process. How do you go about organizing your systems, your people, all of your assets, your own daily life and how you spend time? How do you organize those things to increase your rate of experimentation? Because not all of your experiments are going to work. You cannot invent and pioneer if you cannot accept failure. To invent, you need to experiment. And if you know in advance that it's going to work, it is not an experiment. And so that's a very important thing. They are inseparable twins, failure and invention. And so you have to be willing to do that. And it's embarrassing to fail. It's always embarrassing to fail. But you have to say, no, that's not how this works. If I said to you, you have a 10% chance with a particular decision, a 10% chance of a 100x return, you should take that bet every time. But you're still going to be wrong 9 out of 10 times. And it's going to feel bad 9 out of 10 times. And with technology, the outcomes, the results can be very long-tailed. The payoff can be very asymmetric, which is why you should do so much experimentation. Everybody knows that if you swing for the fences, you hit more home runs, but you also strike out more. But with the baseball, that analogy doesn't go far enough, because with baseball, no matter how well you connect with the ball, you can only get 4 runs. The success is capped at 4 runs. But in business, every once in a while, you step up to the plate and you hit the ball so hard, you get 1,000 runs. And so when you have that kind of asymmetric payoff, and one at bat can get you 1,000 runs, it encourages you to experiment more. It's the right business decision to experiment more. It's also better for your customers. Customers like the successful experiments. We all have adversity in our lives. I doubt if you really, if you know somebody, any friend or anybody that you talk to, there's no lack of adversity. And by the way, that's good, because it's what teaches us how to get back up. You fall down, you get back up. It always happens. And you get certain gifts in life, and you want to take advantage of those. But I guess my advice on adversity and success would be to be proud not of your gifts, but of your hard work and your choices. So, you may be, the kinds of gifts you get in life, you might be really good at math. It might be really easy for you. That's a kind of gift. But practicing that math and taking it to the next step, that could be very challenging and hard, and take a lot of sweat. That's a choice. You can't really be proud of your gifts because they were given to you. You can be grateful for them and thankful for them. But your choices, you choose to work hard. You choose to do hard things. Those are choices that you can be proud of. If you want to be an inventor of any kind, inventing a new service offering for customers or a new product or anything, being an inventor requires, because the world is so complicated, you have to be a domain expert. I mean, in a way, even if you're not at the beginning, you have to learn enough so that you become a domain expert. But the danger is, once you've become a domain expert, you can be trapped by that knowledge. And so inventors have this paradoxical ability to have that, 10,000 hours of practice and be a real domain expert, and have that beginner's mind. Have that look at it freshly, even though they know so much about the domain. And that's the key to inventing. You have to have both. And I think that is intentional. I think all of us have that inside of us, and we can all do it, but you have to be intentional about it. You have to say, yeah, I am going to become an expert, and I'm going to keep my beginner's mind. So your question is, did I kind of anticipate what would happen over the last 22 years at Amazon? And the answer is, God, no. So, Amazon started as a very small company. It was me and a few other people. I was driving all the packages to the post office myself in my 1987 Chevy Blazer. When I raised money for Amazon, I had to raise $1 million,
which I raised from 22 different investors, $50,000 each. They got 20% of the company for the $1 million. And it was 40 people told me no. So I had to take 60 meetings to get 20 yeses. The first question was always, what's the internet? And I had to walk through that. And this was 1994, early 95. And so did I anticipate, fast forward to today and the current version of it? No. It has been one foot in front of the other. And I think that is true for most businesses, where you kind of proceed adaptively. It's step by step. You figure it out. You have a success. And then you kind of double down on that success and you figure out what else you can do, what customers want. Ever since I was 5 years old, that's when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon. I've been kind of passionate about space, rockets, rocket engines, space travel. I became a science fiction reader, and I've always known that I wanted to do something having to do with space, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it for really almost my whole life. And that's one of the things. You guys will find that you have passions, and having a passion is a gift. I think we all have passions, and you don't get to choose them. They pick you, but you have to be alert to them. You have to be looking for them. And when you find your passion, it's a fantastic gift for you because it gives you direction, it gives you purpose. You can have a job, or you can have a career, or you can have a calling. And the best thing is to have a calling. And if you find your passion, you'll have that, and all your work won't feel like work to you. Ask everybody to not think in 2 to 3 year time frames, but to think in 5 to 7 year time frames. To not think about, when somebody says to me, congratulates Amazon on a good quarter, which is a very common thing to say. You meet somebody, they're being nice, they looked at your financial results for the quarter, they're like, good quarter. I say thank you. But what I'm thinking to myself is, that quarter, those quarterly results were actually pretty much fully baked about 3 years ago. And so like today, I'm working on a quarter that is going to happen in 2020, not next quarter. Next quarter, for all practical purposes, is done already, and it's probably been done for a couple of years. And so if you start to think that way, it changes how you spend your time, how you plan, where you put your energy, and your ability to look around corners gets better. So many things improve if you can take a long term. By the way, it's not natural for humans, so it's a discipline that you have to build. The kind of get rich slowly schemes are not big sellers on infomercials. And so that's something that you have to sort of steel yourself for and discipline and teach. You can choose. We all get to choose our life stories, and it's the choices that define us, not our gifts. Everybody in this room has many gifts. I have many gifts. You can never be proud of your gifts because they're gifts. They were given to you. You might be tall, or you might be really good at math, or you might be extremely beautiful or handsome, or there are many gifts. And you can only be proud really of your choices, because those are the things that you are acting on. And one of the most important choices that each of us has, and you know this just as well as I do, is you can choose a life of ease and comfort, or you can choose a life of service and adventure. And when you're 80, which one of those things you think you're going to be more proud of? You're going to be more proud of having chosen a life of service and adventure. I've always been focused. When I was in Montessori school, the Montessori school teacher told my mom that I wouldn't switch tasks, and they got me to switch tasks by picking me up, including my chair, and just moving me to the new task station. I've gotten a little better about that over the years, but it's still, task switching is still a problem for me.
Because you made it this far in a video, I want to celebrate you. Most people start and don't finish. Most people never actually follow through. Most people say they want something, but they don't ever do the work to actually get it. But you're different. you are special. Believe Nation, you made it here all the way to the end, and I love you. So as a special celebration, if you put a hashtag Believe down in the comments below on this video, I will showcase you and celebrate you somewhere on the screen in a future video because you are awesome. If you want 10 more amazing rules from Jeff Bezos, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Do you have? I don't have plan Bs. I actually don't like plan Bs. I find plan Bs are, they defocus you from plan A. Plan B should always be make plan A work.